Ernest Sandoval, a man in his early 40s, stands by the coffee machine in the break room. He watches as his coffee cup fills up. It's a slow process as the coffee barely oozes out. Ernest yawns and looks out of the break room window onto the desolate office floor. During the day, the office is a bustling place that is almost too fast-paced to keep up with, but overnight, the graveyard shift is a ghost town. After much anticipation, the coffee cup is finally filled. Ernest grabs his cup, puts a dash of creamer, and shuffles his feet to his cubicle. He plops down on his chair and sighs heavily as he looks at the seemingly endless stacks of paper that lay scattered on his desk. Ernest takes a sip of his coffee and begins shuffling through his paperwork. He begins organizing it, and not even halfway through he yawns and chugs his coffee in hopes of waking up. It is to no avail. He looks at his watch and the time reads 3:32 a.m. Ernest sorts through a chart of the fuel stations filled that previous day and the billing for each. He matches the billing amounts compared to gallons dumped. He's able to work through several of the charts. As the clock hits 7 a.m., Ernest wastes no time before clocking out and rushing out of the office. He starts up his rusted, beat-up truck and drives out of the parking lot. He pulls up to his house, and sitting on a rocking chair out front of his cottage-style home is Maria Sandoval, Ernest's wife of 11 years. On her lap is a plate wrapped in tinfoil. Ernest quickly gets out of his truck and meets his wife halfway along the walkway to their home. Maria kisses him as she hands him the plate. "How was work, honey?" Maria asks, a smile on her face. "It was good. Slow and boring as usual. I'll be back as quick as I can." Ernest holds the plates up. "Okay, love. Tell your mom I said hi and we'll meet up this week for some coffee." "I'll tell her." Ernest gets back into his truck and drives off. Linda Sandoval sits in her chair by her front window. She has a rosary wrapped around her hand. She looks out to the street with anticipation. After several moments of waiting, Ernest, her son, pulls into the driveway and parks. A smile fills her face. The front door opens and Ernest, with the plate in hand, steps inside. "Mijo!" Linda shouts with joy at her son. She stands and greets him with a warm hug and a kiss on his cheek. Ernest smiles. "Got you breakfast this morning, your favorite. Tacos." "Perfect, I'll warm them up." Linda takes the plate from her son and walks to the kitchen, where she heats up the plate in the microwave. Ernest sits at the dining room table. He looks around at the pictures of his mom and dad together. A sadness fills his face and tears well in his eyes. Linda joins her son at the table with her plate of food. She starts eating. "So how are you doing, Mom?" Ernest asks her. "Well, same as I was yesterday and every other day. Okay, I guess. Trying to stay strong." A few tears roll down Linda's cheeks. Ernest places his hand on his mom's. "I'm here for you, Mom. I know it's tough. I miss him too." Linda sniffles and fights back the rest of her tears. "I don't know what I would do without you. These daily breakfast drop-offs are the highlight of my day. They keep me going." "Good, Mom. I'm happy to hear that." Ernest sits with his mom until she's done eating. He takes her plate to the trash. She walks to a drawer in the kitchen and takes out an extra rosary and hands it to her son. They both walk in silence to Linda's prayer room. They kneel in front of a picture of Jesus on the cross. Next to the picture of Jesus is a picture of Mother Mary. Linda begins praying. "We come to you humbled and begging that Emmanuel's Spirit has entered the gates of heaven, where your precious Son is seated at the right hand of God, his Father. Please, Mary, intercede this prayer and have mercy on us, Emmanuel, for we are all sinners." Ernest grips his rosary and holds his hand up towards the pictures. The mom and son spend several more minutes praying before ending. Ernest gives his mom a kiss on the cheek and walks to his truck. Rock music plays through Ernest's speakers in his truck at a low volume. The music becomes staticky. It cuts in and out for a moment before the music is entirely consumed by static. Ernest attempts changing the station, but it doesn't change. The static increases, becoming louder. He attempts shutting off the radio, but it doesn't power off. An indistinct voice comes through the static. It's faint. The voice becomes louder and catches Ernest's attention. "Help!" The voice pleads through the static. It's a familiar voice, a voice he has heard before. The static fades away and the music returns. Ernest pulls up to his house and wipes his tears before getting off and walking up to his front door. Maria Sandoval is a supportive wife. She understands and respects her husband's beliefs. She does everything in her power to let her husband know he's loved and he's not alone. Maria greets her husband upon him entering the house. Ernest hugs her tightly. He's always hugged her tightly, but this one was tighter than usual. How'd it go with your mom? It went good. She loved the tacos, of course. Ernest smiles at his wife. Well, I'll definitely keep making them then. Maria smiles, blushing at her husband. A picture of Ernest and his dad fishing catches his attention. He goes silent for a moment. I'm going to get some sleep. I'm beat. Ernest kisses his wife and moves on to his bedroom, where he plops down and drifts into a deep sleep. Beep, beep, beep. Ernest's alarm clock screams, bringing him out of his coma. He slaps it with force, silencing its screams. Ernest enters the kitchen and grabs his thermos that is filled with hot coffee. Maria is sitting on the couch watching television. I'll see you later, babe, Maria tells her husband. They exchange a quick kiss and Ernest heads off to work. Ernest drives on the highway that is nearly absent of any other cars, minus a few travelers and big rigs. The inside of his truck is silent. The radio turns on by itself. Static fills the speakers. Ernest attempts turning it off, but it doesn't work. What the hell? Ernest asks himself, confused. Ernest! That familiar voice from earlier comes through the static. The static clears slightly. Help me, Ernest. I'm stuck here. Ernest pulls off to the shoulder and he tries catching his breath, but can't for a few moments. The reason the voice sounded familiar was because he knew who the voice belonged to. It was the voice of his dad. 37.5439 North, 107.7640 West. Coordinates for location. Please, you... The static consumes his dad's voice and it is no longer audible. Ernest stares in disbelief at the radio for a moment. His jaw hangs open. A big rig zooms by, honking its horn, bringing him back to the present moment. He brings up his notes on his phone and types in the coordinates that his father gave him. Growing up, Ernest was a Boy Scout and his dad, Manuel, was a scout leader. Manuel taught his son and the rest of the troops about coordinates in the event they were ever lost. Always know your location, his dad would often say. Ernest exits the highway and turns back. He starts driving back towards his house. The house is dark. Maria is asleep with the bedroom door closed. The door bursts open and Ernest excitedly marches in. He shakes Maria a few times. She rubs her eyes and looks up at him. She sits up half asleep. What's wrong? Maria asks groggily. You're never going to believe what happened right now, Ernest tells his wife. What? She asks with curiosity. I heard my dad on the radio. Maria sits quietly looking at her husband. She's confused. I know how it sounds, but I know it was him, Ernest tells her, hoping to convince her. Maria continues to sit in silence. After a moment, she breaks it. Honey, your dad is gone. Look, I'll show you. He came through static on the radio and gave me these coordinates, Ernest tells Maria, holding the phone up for her to see his notes. She glances at the note quickly. You have to let him go. He's gone, babe. Ernest shakes his head. I know you don't believe me, but I'm going to find him. I have to. Ernest starts walking out of the room. Maria jumps up from their bed. Wait. Ernest stops short of the door. Maria places her hands on his face, and she looks him in the eyes. I support you. You do whatever you have to. Just know I'm here for you. Ernest leans in and kisses her. Ernest searches the coordinates on his phone. San Juan National Forest, located exactly 777 miles from his house. He shifts his truck into drive and pulls off from his house. The midnight moon hangs high above the forest. The forest is made up of a sea of trees covering over just 1 million acres. It's a cloudless night. Countless stars light up the night sky. Ernest pulls up to the entrance to the forest. His headlights, foggy, barely light the entry into the dense trees. He turns off his engine, and the sound of his door creaking open carries through the night air. Ernest steps out with a backpack, gallon of water, and a flashlight. He shuts his door with a slam. Hundreds of crickets chirping fill the night air. Ernest enters the wooded area. A cold wind blows and the tree branches dance in the wind. Pine needles crunch under Ernest's boots as he continues hiking. The wind picks up in speed and drowns out the sound of the crickets chirping. Goosebumps cover Ernest's flesh. The chill in the air is uninviting and different from the one previous to him entering the forest. The wind ceases and a deafening silence falls over the area. Ernest perks his ears up in hopes of hearing something. Anything at this point. "Dad!" His scream echoes through the air. Unfortunately, it's met with silence. Ernest checks his phone for the time, 2:23 a.m. He stops hiking and pitches his tent for the night. He sets up a rope around his tent with the bell attached to it. He enters his tent and kneels down with his rosary in his hand. "Lord, thank you for another day, and please guide me as I look for my dad. Amen." Ernest gets in his sleeping bag and closes his eyes. Ding, ding! The bell ringing outside of Ernest's tent wakes him. He sits up straight, stiffening his body. He listens intently for any sound, but there's only silence. Despite pine needles littering the ground, there isn't a single snap. A deep growl comes from just outside the tent. A large shadow moves in the pale moonlight. The shadow blocks out the moon's light briefly. Ernest grabs his hunting knife. Sweat pushes out from his pores as his nerves take over. His heart thunders in his chest. After waiting in fear and anticipation for several moments, the tension settles along with Ernest's nerves. Once the sun starts rising, Ernest emerges from his tent and begins tearing down camp. The pine needles on the ground which surround the area are singed. He hurries packing and sets out for the day. There is no destination, only hope that his dad is out here somewhere and he can find him. Ernest reaches a peak that overlooks one of the many valleys of woods. The valley stretches for miles. "Dad!" he calls out at the top of his lungs. Again, no response or callback, only his own echo. He checks his watch, 1:57 p.m. Despite his wavering optimism, he pushes on and continues hiking. Ernest's stomach growls. He takes out a sandwich from his bag and kneels down to take a break and eat. The sun has started setting just beyond the forest. The sky has turned multiple shades of purple and orange. Ernest finishes his sandwich and checks his watch. The time hasn't changed. It still reads 1:57 p.m. He flicks his watch to see if it changes. When it doesn't, he pulls out his phone, but it's dead. Great. Night comes quickly and darkness descends on the sleepy forest. As Ernest gathers wood to start a fire, he notices something odd. There are no sounds from animals of any kind, nor has he seen any in several hours. He places the wood on a pile of pine needles. He starts the fire and sits by it, holding his hands close to keep warm. The fire crackles loudly as Ernest looks up to the night sky. "Help me!" A man's voice screams in agonizing pain. Ernest springs up to his feet. He looks in the direction of the scream. Another scream comes from behind him. This one, a woman's voice, tormented and suffering. He stands, confused and stuck on which direction to head in. They both need his help. As he ponders his next step, the trees in front of him shake violently as if something is moving within them. Ernest removes his rosary from his pocket, closes his eyes, and mutters a prayer silently to himself. He opens his eyes and the trees have ceased shaking and returned back to their absolute stillness. He lets out a deep sigh of relief. At daybreak, Ernest packs up and begins backtracking his steps towards the entrance to the forest. He reaches a clearing and discovers an old-timey chapel. It's dilapidated, discolored, and severely weathered. Ernest approaches the chapel with extreme caution. The entry door is hanging off of its hinges sideways. Ernest peeks inside before stepping over the door and entering. Sunlight shines through the broken glass windows, illuminating the inside partially. The white pews are caked with dirt and mold. "Hello?" Ernest calls out, hoping for a response but is only met with silence. He hears indistinct whispers coming from the confessional booth. He approaches the booth and swings the door open. It's empty. He turns and continues his walk towards the front of the chapel. Attached to the altar with the thumbtack is a picture of Ernest's dad. Blood runs from his dad's eyes and nose down the rotted wood of the altar. The wood floor begins cracking. Burning hands reach up from underground. They grab at Ernest's ankles. Hundreds of screams escape from the cracks in the floor as Ernest dodges the hands of the burning. One of the hands grabs his foot, causing him to trip and hit his head, knocking himself unconscious. "Son," Ernest's dad calls out to him. His voice is close, closer than it has been in quite some time. Ernest sits up from the ground and sees his dad approaching. He appears healthy and his complexion is vibrant. Towards the end, Manuel had started withering away, both physically and mentally, from the cancer. Ernest smiles a big smile and his dad returns one of his own. Joy and happiness fills Ernest as his dad holds his arms open and embraces him with a tight hug. The hug between the father and son quickly becomes cold. Ernest takes a step back. His dad's complexion has turned pale, and his skin is rotting and whole chunks of flesh fall off as he walks towards him. A darkness moves just behind Manuel. It moves silently and swiftly with every step he takes. Long, bony hands stretch out from the darkness and grab at the air. Ernest walks backwards as he searches for his rosary. He finds it and pulls it out. "The power of Christ compels you," Ernest shouts with conviction, and the darkness implodes and disappears into thin air, and his dad's appearance fades into a spirit which floats to him. Manuel, a spirit of light, approaches his son. Ernest keeps his rosary gripped tightly. Tears collect in Ernest's eyes. "Don't cry, son. You've helped find me. Now my soul can be free." Ernest remains speechless and nods his head somberly. He looks at his dad as he begins slowly fading away into the air above. "I'll always be here for you, son, even when it seems I'm not." Manuel speaks his last words to Ernest as the last of his light fades away. Ernest exits the chapel feeling at peace. He turns to look back at the chapel and gives it one last glance. It has been restored back to new. The exterior shines brightly with its white glow. There's a real sense of peace which surrounds it. He smiles and begins his hiking, knowing about his father's soul is at peace and resting where it needs to be.